What's up, everybody? Today I want to talk about a topic that's been on my mind the past day or so, as I've been seeing some discussion about this in Pokemon Facebook communities as well as on other forums like Cerebi, and people seem to have some misconceptions about Ubers, and I guess I may as well talk about it since we already have, like 3 or 4 potential Ubers that have been revealed for Sun and Moon. So those will receive obviously a lot of attention, and when that time comes, you all can refer to this video for clarity on exactly how Ubers functions, and specifically philosophically how Ubers differs from OU, specifically in terms of banning things and regulating their metagame, or lack thereof, more than likely. Especially among newer Ubers players and newer Pokemon players in general that have only played competitive Pokemon in 6th generation, it's become sort of a common gripe to complain about certain threats in the Ubers tiers that seem to have not been addressed. Like, what about Primal Groudon? That thing is centralizing as fuck, it's way too powerful, you basically have to force yourself to use it on every single Ubers team, almost every Ubers team that's serious, or you just lose. Xerneas is stupid, and Primal Kyogre is a little bit too strong as well. Well, okay. So there seems to be a misconception about exactly how Ubers works, and I believe a lot of this is born from the recent, well, not so recent, it's been like 2 fucking years, the Mega Rayquaza ban that was responsible for creating the Anything Goes metagame, and set a huge, monumental precedent for Ubers that it actually banned like an actual Pokemon for once. This set a precedent for people thinking that this would somehow be like a repeat event, and that it would pave the way for Ubers to actually ban things that were harmful to the metagame. But, well, that's not really the case with Ubers, because you have to understand their philosophy when it comes to regulating the metagame. It's that they don't. The first priority for Ubers is to ban as little as possible and restrict as little as possible, because it already is the ban list, and if it acted and functioned like an actual, like a tier, then things would just be way too confusing, and it would result in an upward spiral that would never end, as metagames above Ubers would keep being created, because inevitably there will be some kind of dominating force. In fact, the only time Ubers gets rid of anything is, and we're going to use a couple of keywords here that I'll be using throughout the video, Ubers wants to maintain a playable metagame. It doesn't even officially recognize itself as a tier as much as it does as a ban list, even though Ubers is obviously played in tournaments and in many ways functions like a tier. Its original intent was just to be a ban list, so they don't really prioritize maintaining an ideal metagame, that's the other keyword, as much as they do preserving a playable metagame. Mega Rayquaza made Ubers unplayable, and that's why it had to go. It's just plain and simple. And while Primal Groudon and Xerneas and threats like that certainly make Ubers a worse experience than it would be without them, they don't make the game unplayable. They simply inhibit an ideal metagame, sort of like what OU pursues and every tier below it. Certainly, if Ubers were to function like OU did, then of course, yes, Primal Groudon and Xerneas would at the very least get a suspect test. So these people are not necessarily wrong in claiming that Primal Groudon and Xerneas are unhealthy for the metagame, or too powerful, or too centralizing. Nobody's really denying these things, but there seems to be a disconnect between these newer players that are trying to get better and trying to understand banning and Smogon Policy, and the Uber's philosophy, the known Uber's philosophy. And I mean, to be completely honest, I personally didn't even agree with the Mega Rayquaza ban. Not necessarily because I didn't think it was too powerful for Ubers. Yeah, that thing's ridiculous. I mean, if Ubers were to function like OU, of course it needs to go. It's just that I find that the standard that was used was a bit too subjective for my liking. But I mean, of course, it was an executive decision, so in the end, there's really nothing anybody could have done about it. Chaos decided that he was going to make anything goes. I think he even mentioned that he was thinking about it before Mega Rayquaza, so there's that. But I think philosophically, it just doesn't line up. It's a contradiction with Uber's, with the Uber's precedent. It sets a bad precedent that has led to this misconception that Ubers is now suddenly going to be banning things that are unhealthy for the metagame. Now, Mega Rayquaza just made it unplayable, but unplayable is also kind of subjective, and it is the cause of a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to the Uber's philosophy, compared to the mainstream tiers. However, I aim to shed some light on this whole matter and give some perspective by providing an additional example of the differences between the Uber's philosophy and the OU philosophy. So let's take evasion clause for example. Why do we have evasion clause in OU or in any mainstream tier? Would OU be unplayable without evasion clause? Now, before you give me a knee-jerk reaction, really sit down and think about this. Evasion tactics are horrible because they're inconsistent by their very nature. If you use a fully evasion-based team, you can't get consistent wins with that. So then why do we have evasion clause? If clearly it's not going to make the metagame unplayable, because the vast majority of players who are good will not use evasion tactics. Alright, I got that down. So, in theory, at the very least, it wouldn't make OU unplayable. So, the reason we have evasion clause is because the OU Council aims to eliminate even the slightest chance that somebody can win without actually being the more skilled player. Aside from stuff like hacks that you really cannot micromanage or control, even though we do have skill mons in the other metas for that, within reason, OU aims to eliminate any possibility that the lesser skilled player can win a battle. And that's why we have evasion clause, because even though it's not really going to make OU unplayable, it's an inconvenience, because once in a while you're going to run into some asshole who thinks he can cheese you with evasion, and a certain amount of time it will happen, and he will beat you with a cheese strategy, and without actually being skilled. And I think that really exemplifies the difference between an unplayable meta and an ideal meta. An OU metagame without evasion clause is certainly playable, it's just not very ideal because a small percentage of the time you'll be robbed a win from a less skilled player. And so naturally, therefore, a meta with evasion clause is more ideal. So notice how Ubers doesn't have evasion clause. That's right, it doesn't have it. That's because Ubers does not concern itself with having an ideal metagame as long as it's perfectly playable. So that's why it never saw any need to implement the same evasion clause as the mainstream tiers. And that very much distinguishes itself from clauses that are implemented in Ubers that would very clearly break the metagame and make it unplayable, such as sleep clause. I mean, that should go without saying, because otherwise Darkrai would make Ubers unplayable. Absolutely. And so unfortunately, this is really the only explanation I can give to why Mega Rayquaza is banned from Ubers, but Primal Groudon isn't and Xerneas isn't. It's because of a subjective measure that the Ubers community and Chaos choose to use. And generally, there haven't been any conflicts about this. There's generally been a consensus over what makes Ubers unplayable and what doesn't. I mean, obviously Species Clause will make Ubers unplayable. Having Pokemon that can use OHKO moves will make Ubers unplayable. Endless battles will make Ubers unplayable. So it was just that the Ubers community, and particularly Chaos, decided that Mega Rayquaza made Ubers unplayable, but anything below that standard doesn't get banned, regardless of how seemingly unhealthy they are for the meta. Once again, if Ubers functioned like OU, then yes, you are correct. Primal Groudon would be fucking gone. Same thing with Xerneas. Well, Xerneas would be a little bit more debatable, but Groudon would be blown away, destroyed, gone. Hopefully, you have a better understanding now of the Ubers philosophy, and you should keep this in mind if you ever want to challenge yourself and try playing Ubers yourself. As for me, I would rather gauge my eyes out. Hopefully, Hopefully Sun and Moon can fix this, but I really doubt it.